In the world of personal development, there is a massive emphasis on self esteem and creating greater levels of confidence. And yet, what we should be paying attention to and setting our intentions on is creating a greater sense of self awareness and self acceptance, developing self compassion, and learning how to be accountable for our thoughts and our behaviors and the way in which we contribute to the world around us. Self esteem is contingent on our external circumstances. It's conditional, and consequently, when our life circumstance change in any way, our self-esteem is diminished, and as a result, our self-worth lowers. By focusing instead on building a more compassionate level of self-awareness, we allow ourselves to generate or create a more pervading sense of self-acceptance, which is not based on external circumstances and isn't dependent on what's going on in our life. It is internally based, and it is something that is very constant. And a lot of people tend to associate self-compassion with being a bit of a doormat, or being very lenient with the self, or being overly indulgent, letting yourself off the hook. And this isn't the case at all. I mean, the people that we care the most about are the people that we want to see take care of themselves. I mean, you're not going to say to your kid, eat all of the food in the fridge. You're going to try to guide them towards the healthiest option. So when we show ourselves compassion, we are more likely to be motivated to do the things necessary to actually take care of ourselves, despite our assumption that we're going to be the opposite. I mean, ultimately, in order for us to implement a positive change in our life, we need to first of all practice acceptance for where it is that we actually are. And we have a tendency to assume that if we accept ourselves, that we're never going to want to change. Yet ultimately, if you are not accepting where you're actually at, you are in denial of your reality, which makes it almost impossible for you to make any changes, because you are not being realistic about where it is that you're actually at. Compassion can be fierce and is a necessary element in implementing many of the structures and disciplines that can have a major impact on our overall well-being. It also creates a better relationship for us with failure. It allows us to recognize the inevitability of setbacks and failures as part and parcel of the human experience, and to make peace with common humanity. And in doing so, it allows us to sit with adversity, to experience failure and not be deterred, to recognize that it is part and parcel of living, part and parcel of being human, and that it is an opportunity for growth, as opposed to being indicative of there being something inherently wrong with us, or us having some fatal character flaw, or just being completely inadequate. So it's allowing yourself to forgive yourself for your failures and to take on board the lessons necessary to do better the next time. It's also about learning how to soothe your own soul. I mean, ultimately, we have a tendency to beat ourselves up, to be our harshest critics. And if you think about it rationally, if you had an employer who was constantly berating you, constantly putting you down, you wouldn't feel all that motivated, and you wouldn't feel particularly happy about your circumstance. And yet we assume that if we constantly give ourselves a hard time, that we're somehow going to perform at a more optimum level. The reality is, we need to be kinder to ourselves. We need to recognize our inner critic with compassion, and to understand that it is just an internalized narrative that we took on board when in our childhood, that we don't necessarily have to listen to, and we can question it. We can see it with the kindness that it deserves and the understanding that it deserves, because ultimately its main job is just to protect us, although it does so in a very maladaptive fashion. But to be able to question it and to challenge it a little bit, and make choices that are more in alignment with who it is that we need to be, to encourage ourselves, to speak to ourselves like we would a little child, because oftentimes what we all need a little bit more of is compassion and encouragement and support and understanding. And being able to do that for ourselves transforms the way that we see ourselves and the way that we see the world around us. If you would like to work on developing a greater sense of self-awareness, self-acceptance, accountability and compassion, then get in touch with me on my website. It is fundamentals.ie.